بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We begin in the name of Allah. All praise and glory be to Allah, and may His finest peace and blessings be upon His Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, and his family and his companions and all those who tread his path. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us and you a life upon his path, and a death upon his religion, and a reunion around him. Allahumma ameen. May Allah grant us and you actions that are always righteous, and make them sincerely for his sake, and not allow any of his creation a share of our intentions. Allahumma ameen. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. The panel is supposed to be centered around ridding racism and discrimination from our communities. And it has nothing to do with the panelists up here, but I tried very hard to not be part of this panel because this is a very challenging discussion for many of us, myself included. And I think one of the reasons why it's very challenging is because many a times this discussion happens in ways, in tones, in directions that are either unproductive or, may Allah forbid, like they're counterproductive, like they feed the downward spiral. And many a times that's either because the discussion focuses or overly focuses on the ideals of Islam, the perfection of Islam, and the Quran and the Sunnah when it comes to racial equality. And so we draw this beautifully rosy image, and we leave out the fact that we haven't identified how to get back there. The ideal society that was truly informed by the beautiful values of the Quran and the Sunnah. On the other end, sometimes the discussion is talking about the Muslims themselves and how far they've departed from the Quran and Sunnah in this regard. And so it paints this overly ugly image that doesn't really give us any way to climb out of it. And so I pray, inshallah ta'ala, this will be a solution-oriented discussion that balances a bit of both of those things. Alhamdulillah, we're honored to have our good brother, Abu Sumayyah, hafidhahullah, who's the Imam of Bunsin JMIC Muslim Center and the director of the Esperanza Community Hub. And our good brother Mufti Muneer, hafidhahullah, who's the Imam of Masjid Khan wa Sunnah in Van Wyck in New York. And our director and advisor and beloved Sheikh Zayd, and our sister, may Allah reward her and increase her and continue to benefit us with her, our sister Sheikh Zayd, Sumara, hafidhahullah. And so I'm going to jump right into it. Sheikh Zayd, if you don't mind me beginning with you in the hot seat. How do we make sure we don't fall into either of those extremes? The extreme number one of overly focusing on the ideals and being in a little bit of a denial about our reality and where we need to get to, how to get to those ideals. Are you sitting on a... And the opposite extreme as well, the extreme of overly focusing on how much we've gravitated away from those ideals without offering any hope or any recognition of the beauty that Islam has kept observable among the Muslims, even in terms of racial equality, even until today.
Bismillah ar-Rahman. Let me begin by saying I tried my level best to get out of this panel. I got out. I got kicked out of the WhatsApp group that he created. Then he rejoined me. Then I got kicked out again. So I don't know what the status was. I'm old school. I believe in, as Malcolm said in his ballad or the bullet, we don't air our dirty laundry in public. So I'm very uncomfortable with discussions like this. I know there's a need and a time and a place for this, but you have to recognize we live in a time where everything is recorded, and there are people looking for all of these things, and they're changing the narrative, to frankly speak. So I believe in the inherent good of the Muslim community. We have problems, but I really don't like talking about our problems in public. So I think overall, the solution to racism in the Muslim community, we have the solutions in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The only thing we need to do is go back to the sources, understand them correctly. We have to recognize that human beings are imperfect. Allah gave us perfect guidance, but we're imperfect human beings. We are going to fall. Every family has faults, every community has faults, but we have to keep reminding ourselves of the mission, the goal, the bigger picture, and keep reminding ourselves of the great directives of the Prophet ﷺ on racism or the subject of tribal. Well, racism, I think, is not the best term. It was in the modern conception, it became a color-coded term, right? White versus black and colored. In pre-modern times, it was mostly tribalistic. So there were tribes, right? It had nothing to do with color, as our Sheikh Abdullah Hakim Quick reminds us that the problem in the past was not a color-based paradigm, but this is a European invention. So we have to recognize that it was just a problem of different tribes and families. But the Prophet ﷺ, he created a solution. He created an environment that was so egalitarian. Alhamdulillah, we just need to revive that model of Medina. He lived in a society where there were multiple tribes, and some of them hated each other. But he created this perfect brotherhood. Were there problems between the Sahaba? Yes, there were. There were times where they forgot the ideal. All he had to do was step in and remind them of the ideal, like in the battle of Bani al-Mustaliq. Right? In Bani al-Mustaliq, what happened, the Muhajirin and the Ansar, a person from the Muhajirin camp got into a fight with someone from the Ansar camp. And then suddenly what happened is people rallied to the side of the tribe they belonged to. And then there were calls made, Ya Muhajirin, Ya al-Ansar. When the Prophet ﷺ found out about that, he came and he was so angry. And he said, leave all of this. And people were so embarrassed at how angry they made the Prophet ﷺ, because this is not what he taught them. So they fell, but he reminded them, they came back to the ideal and they were brothers again. This happened again and again, and that's what we need to do in our communities, that, there really is no differentiation in our communities. It's all based on Iman and faith. But are there problems? Yes, there are problems. Are we going to broadcast our problems, put them on social media, create these causes for everyone to jump on and see how racist the Muslim community is? No. As Sheikh Walid Basuni marvelously said today, are you going to focus on solutions or the hope or the dream or the problems? Like he reminded us, the famous speech of Martin Luther King. It was very funny. He said, imagine he came out and he was highlighting the problem and he began his speech by saying, I have a problem, not I have a dream, right? So always keep the ideal in front of I'm an idealistic person. I think we have enough in the great wisdom of the Prophet and the timeless guidance of the Quran to solve our problems, and we just need to remind ourselves. If we fall, just try to have a good opinion of your brothers and sisters. It's not because of evil intentions. People make mistakes. Let's remind each other in the spirit of brotherhood and sisterhood of who we're supposed to be. And I think that's the best thing I can say.
Jazakallah kulla khair. And I think this is huge. And I believe probably just because I guess the sphere of work, me and our good brother Abu Sumayyah have shared a lot of thoughts on this very point over time, and that's why I'm just going to switch over to him, if you would forgive me for that, Sheikh Mufti. I'm probably right in quoting you about you believing, very similar to Dr. Abu Zayd said, about this not really being racism, but it's still unacceptable, right? Certain aspects of the behavior of our communities. And so can you just give us some insight on your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think we need to be careful in terming it just with a blanket statement of racism and saying that it's all racism. I think some of it could be ignorance, some of it can be a lack of consideration, some of it can be maybe just not putting any thought into it, right? I agree with Dr. Abu Zayd that there are some things that I also have a problem that we air on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and things of this nature. But I also believe that some things need to be aired, right? We may seem as a dysfunctional family, but nonetheless, right, a dysfunctional family has to figure out how to solve its own problems, right? At home, if I have a dysfunctional family, we need to continue to cooperate and collaborate and work together until we can find a solution, right? But if I'm just hiding part of those sicknesses from the other part of my family, the larger part of my family, and we all just have our pockets of sicknesses that we're dealing with, and we're not coming together to solve the issue, right? It becomes very difficult to kind of solve that issue that's at hand, right? And I'm not calling that issue racism. I'm calling it maybe, is dysfunctional, right? Whatever it may be. And it's hard because we're talking about different things, right? When we talk about airing stuff out on the internet, we can be talking about many things that have been going on lately, right? But here, I'm kind of just referring it back to, our leaders in our communities recognizing that if you have people who are not a majority, an ethnic group that is not a majority in your community, just acknowledge them, right? Acknowledge them to a point where you recognize who they are, you give them a space, you create a space for them, you make them feel welcomed, right? Because when we read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and we go into Medina, we see that he created brotherhood, he brought the people together. This was his purpose, right? And he wasn't leaving the people out, right? Even we was discussing this morning during Fajr with, Sa'd al-Ansari and Abdurrahman ibn Auf. His offer was sincere. I'll give you half of my wealth. I'll give you my wife if you desire to have one. I'll give you my residence, right? There wasn't any fakeness in that, right? And I think that, the converts or the ethnic group that is coming into a masjid, they need that's the minority. They need to feel that love, that care, right? And as long as they feel that love and that care, I think that we begin to fix that dysfunctionality, right? But we need to get to that point to say, listen, we do have this problem. And how can we come together to solve the problem, right? I think it's difficult to say let's solve it behind doors because it's going on all over the place. Sometimes when we open it up, the masjids begin to discuss it internally, right? And then they begin to kind of maybe solve some of the issues. And we may have some good examples of that. You know what I mean? And we should highlight those good examples of, when things do function, right? And just like you mentioned, Sheikh Waleed, also, he made a comment that I reflected on that, hit me. Making a mistake is better than faking perfection, right? So I prefer to make the mistake and air what's happening than to fake that we are actually perfect, right? Because I don't want people like my mother, who's a new Muslim, to come in and think that our community is perfect, and then when she comes to the community and she sees something that's imperfect, for her to say, whoa, I didn't think that this was what we were going to be faced with. No, we have issues. Mom, we have issues. Auntie, we have issues. My cousin, we got issues, right? Just like every other family has issues, but we have to solve our issues, inshallah.
I think that's extremely important. Without overlapping too much, because there is a later panel this evening on unity between the masajid and in the masajid themselves. But I think it's very important, number one, to recognize we have much to be very proud of, even in these times. According to so many polls and studies, like Pew Research shared this, ISPU shared this, that the Muslims are still the most diverse faith group in America, right? And that is, even if from a distance, the remnants of the beauty and the impactfulness and the competence of our Islam in actually affecting these values, not just in the past, but going back to the issue of apprehension between members of the community or groups, pockets in the community, maybe a little bit of isolationism. Why do you think that happens? And how can we start working around it?
Isolation, why does it happen? Why does it take place? How can we get rid of it? I think it's more than one reason, in my humble opinion. Sometimes people, they isolate themselves because they were isolated. And even if it wasn't a hard push, it might have been a gentle shove. Everyone can't stand the same. Some people are literally pushed and thrown down. Some people, they might just get a little push, and others, as Abu Sumayyah mentioned, they may not get pushed at all, but they don't feel loved, they don't feel welcomed. They don't feel like they're an equal in the community, like, they're not, I'm not welcome here. So therefore, they may isolate themselves. That may be one reason. Another reason behind isolation may come from actual indoctrination. What is and what isn't Islam? What is and what isn't the Sunnah? What is the permissible and impermissible mixing with regards to Islamic orientation, Dawah orientation, race, age, culture, gender? All of those things, I think, play a huge role in what you mentioned, isolation. Another reason, and Allah knows best, is that some people, unfortunately, they may be plagued with the actual problem that I'm better than you, so I don't have to mix with you. Or you're inferior to me, so there's no need for us to have any type of cohesive cooperation, or even, visiting your masjid, having breakfast, whatever the case may be. All right, so I think those are some of the reasons. As far as some of the solutions, I agree with you yourself, Dr. Abu Zayd, Brother Abu Sumayyah, about everything shouldn't be aired publicly. It shouldn't turn into a smear campaign, because that can have adverse effects on Dawah. But at the same time, hush, hush. Sweep it under the rug, taboo, oh no, that's not true, that's exaggerated, is going to allow the festering to continue. And oftentimes, the first thing that you have to do is bring the problem to the surface. You have to bring it to the surface. And we learn this from many aspects in Islam. One, which has nothing to do with the topic, is ruqyah, okay, or we may call exorcism. When there's someone who comes to a reciter of the Quran and he says, I'm possessed by a jinn. I have a jinn in me, all right? The first thing that the master reciter does is he knows that he has to ask certain questions or recite certain things out of the Quran to rouse up the jinn that's supposedly in this person's body. And if he just keeps everything peaceful and calm and, oh, you're all right, you're fine, then the jinn, from his guile or her guile and intelligence, they know to stay low. So therefore, you can't get proper diagnosis if you don't bring it to the surface. But there's a balance. So oftentimes, I think getting rid of this problem of isolation is to bring it to the surface. Let's talk about it. How many masjids do we have in this city? When was the last time we did any type of joint effort? When was the last time an imam came to another masjid? We traded khatibs for Eid, and the list goes on. Another thing is, as was mentioned, is reflecting on the guidance of the Quran. The guidance of the Quran. And from the guidance of the Quran is majority versus minority, minority versus majority. When the Prophet ﷺ began his message, we know there are only a few believers. And it states in the narration of Amr ibn al-As in the Musnad Imam Ahmad, the Prophet ﷺ, he gave him dawah, and he told him what Islam was. And the man, before he was a Muslim, he says, Ma anta. He says, what are you? He says, Ana Nabi. He says, I'm a prophet. And he says, Man ma'aka ala hadha. He says, who's with you? And his claim that you're a prophet and you have the true religion. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ is claimed to have, or is quoted to have said, Ma'i hurrun wa abd. He says, I have a free man with me, Abu Bakr, and I have a slave with me at the time, Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Only a few people with him. But in a few number of years, Allah Azza wa Jal, He sent down upon the Prophet ﷺ, وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. He says, and you see people entering into the faith in droves, swarms, waves. 100,000 people at Hajjatul Wada. That's miraculous. So oftentimes we forget about this. When we have numbers, we forget how much we need each other. Because I have a masjid, I have a center, I have finances, I don't need you. But 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when people first started establishing Islam in masjids, whether it's indigenous Muslims, black, white, Puerto Rican, Muslims who came from other countries, Pakistan, India, Palestine, how was it back then in which you needed your Muslim brother and your Muslim sister? And the people had to live as one. So I think it's one of the most important Quranic principles is to remember when we were just a few. Allah says, you are few people and you are afraid that people, the people will snatch you up and kidnap you. And now Allah made you more, He gave you strength, He gave you power, and now you forget. So Allah, He clearly tells us that إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لِيَطْغَى لِمَاذَا أَرَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى. Man is arrogant and transgressive of the boundaries because he thinks that he doesn't need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I think we have to realize that we need each other. You have something I don't have. I may have something that you may not have. You may have a specialty or a field of expertise that I don't have the ability to grasp. We all need each other. And the moment that we start looking that we don't need each other, we can do without, we can isolate ourselves for whatever reason it is, race, gender, or even reasons and issues of orientation. I don't have to agree with him on every single thing for him to be my brother. We don't have to see eye to eye on every single thing. Certain things we have to. But at the end of the day, I need him for the positive things and also when things don't go so positive. So that's what I would say in a little bit of time that we have. And Allah knows best.
Jazakallah khairan, Mufti.
Can we switch the topic to jinn and exorcism?
That'll wake everybody up.
And he's not calling the board members and these people jinn.
Is Sheikh Walid Basuni here? Sheikh Walid Basuni says the two greatest topics that always get the audience coming through are marriage and jinn. He says, so I'm thinking of doing a talk about marrying jinn. And Jazakallah khairan, Mufti. I mean, the concept that 1% of the population, that's what we are as Muslims in America, 1 to 2%. I mean, those who hate us say we're like 1 million. Those who are like, hyperbolic about Islam say we're about 10 million in the country. Well, we're probably around, 3, 4, 5 million. We're 1 to 2% of the country at best. If we think we have the luxury to not put our hands together and work together, then we're hallucinating, like we're living in a bubble. And this is a huge factor that we have to figure out whatever the reasons are and tackle them. Shaykha, Zayd, I wanted to share with you something and get your thoughts on it. Dr. Dawood Ali, who has lots of contributions, especially regarding the African Muslim narrative and the African American narrative, he once corrected me on something or responded to something I said, which I really felt needed more consideration. When I said that, alhamdulillah, that Islam is colorblind, and of course I meant by that Islam does not disadvantage anyone based on their color. That doesn't exist in our texts, and relatively speaking, doesn't exist in our history. And so he said, no, I would not say that. He said, I would rather say Islam is not colorblind. Islam is very color conscious. It's about embracing the different colors, not blinding ourselves or turning a blind eye or refusing to recognize the diversity, because then you're not really tolerating anything. And so would you care to share some thoughts on this, whether Islam is colorblind or not, or the right and wrong way to understand that?
Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Actually, I was just thinking about Islam being colorblind, and the fact that you can say the opposite is true, that is color conscious, actually speaks to the Quranic, what the Quran draws our attention to when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we have made you nations and tribes so that you may recognize each other, right? So that's directly drawing attention to the fact that there is diversity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created and intended. It was not meant to be one color. And that really is an invitation to appreciate and be enriched by each other's differences. And also I agree that I don't think racism is the right term to use within the Muslim context, because it's actually foreign to our experience as a people, right? It's an invention, a conceptual invention based on the experience of racism, slavery, etc. in the European/American reality. So I think what we need to do is be turned off by any type of ism, whether it's racism or tribalism or feminism, because of the way it isolates or over-focuses on one cause to the detriment of others. And that's a theme that we've seen over and over again. And I think what can help us to really become turned off as a community from all those types of isms is if you go back and think to the Quranic origins of the concept, right? Who was the first one who said, Ana khairun min? Wasn't that Shaitan? So at the root of racism and other issues that we face as a community, it's really going back to Shaitan as the primary supporter or promoter of the idea. And so when you think about it in that way, that is something that discourages the idea and really manifests the ugliness of it, which should hopefully discourage us from being guilty of that consciously or unconsciously.
So I guess we all do agree that we don't want to jump prematurely or overstate or overuse the racism card. But I would like to ask Dr. Abu Zayd something. Some people prematurely use the card perhaps whenever they see a community just gravitating towards their comfort zone, their cultural inclinations, or serving their audience that's primarily from a certain culture, right? Would that be racism?
Well, there's a saying, La mushahata fil istilahat, right? If you ask a question about a word, it depends on how you're using the word. You have to define the word for me. So what do you mean by racism? Same thing like that you talked about colorblind. What do you really mean by that? So as Muslims, we should need to focus on concepts. It's not the words, it's not the terms. Everyone means different things by those. So it is a problem, yes. It's a problem when people exclude certain groups over others. That's a huge problem. It's against the Sunnah. It's not the way it's meant to be. Well, what do you call it? You can call it whatever you want. So I think we shouldn't be hung up over terms, but the concepts are important. That we need to be inclusive of as many people as possible. The Prophet ﷺ never excluded anyone. He looked at those elements in society, those individuals that no one knew, and he reached out to them, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's the kind of paradigm we need in our communities. And I think let's make it practical. And so ethnic groups and communities, when you have a majority ethnic group, like we all, we Google the masajid when we travel. Sometimes we get into a masjid and they're all like, when I was working in Philadelphia, the closest masjid is Indonesian. So I go there, I don't understand a word what everyone's talking about. They have very peculiar customs. So an example like that, when you go to a community and you see a traveler coming in, whatever community you are, it's wise to reach out to people you haven't seen before, just to make them comfortable. And this works for every ethnic group, not to single any group out over others. Once we pray, when we stand up to pray, I'm standing shoulder to shoulder. There's nowhere united. The imam is standing in front of us, so I feel perfect brotherhood. But perhaps after the prayer, they all sit down in the back and they're eating some food that I don't recognize. I don't know what it was. It was on the floor and it looked never saw that before. And so, you feel a little bit, you feel slightly excluded. But, the challenge is for those who feel that way, not to let it get to you, have husnul dhan. And the challenge for the other side is always be reaching out all the time in our communities to try to make everyone involved, inshallah.
I don't believe it's racism, by the way, so I'm with you, inshallah. Like, I do think we do need to be a little bit more reasonable. Like, if you go to a masjid that predominantly they know that the imam or the community that started is from a certain ethnic group, and so they continue to populate around that masjid, and so like they all like biryani, for example, you're not going to say, no, this is America, you have to eat burgers, right? Because there's two people that prefer burgers over biryani. I don't believe it's racism at all, right? I even see that the Prophet ﷺ, even in battle, he would basically regiment people under the banners of their clans because there was more harmony there. There just more similarities, and so they were probably more effective as a cohesive unit like that. And our brother Abu Sumayyah, for example, you have very good reasons why you focus a lot of your efforts like in the community hub, the Esperanza Community Hub, serving the Latino community, because you believe that they are highly populated in this area, and serving them is in short supply, right? And so I would agree this is not racism at all, right? This is not unacceptable forms of prejudice at all. But how can we, Abu Sumayyah, if you can help us, make sure it doesn't lead to that separation that could become a standoff and could become eventually stereotypes developing and tensions, hostilities, may Allah forbid, some point down the line?
Again, I personally believe that every culture should be able to express their cultural values and their cultural practices within, with their people. People feel a sense of connection when you are with your people. Right? This is why when we have programs, we have them in Spanish, because there's a sense of connection, there's a sense of language, there's a sense of culture, there's a background, there's an understanding that takes place when that happens, inshallah ta'ala. So I don't think there's any issues with anyone having an event that may be all Latino or Hispanic or in Spanish, or Bengali, or Pakistani, or Arab, right? That's okay, alhamdulillah. I just think it becomes an issue when it's not two people, right? When, if it's a brother or two, or a sister or two people in the masjid, of course, you're not going to develop a whole menu, right, just to serve two people, alhamdulillah. You may walk over, like Dr. Abu Zayd is saying, and say, listen, perhaps you're not accustomed to this food, you don't know what it is, this is what it is, this may be spicy, this is not spicy, whatever it has. But when the community is a little bit larger, you have a good amount of African American or a good amount of Latinos in your community, then to have some consideration of that. If you're going to do a communal event, right? If you're going to do a communal event, then have some consideration of those other, ethnic groups that are found within your community. If you're just going to have, mashallah, an Arab party, bismillah, tafaddal, no problem, inshallah ta'ala. So I think it's just being cognizant of your community, of the people within your community. And if you're cognizant of the people in your community, then inshallah ta'ala you'll serve everybody, inshallah.
Mufti, would you care to add to this? Ways to make sure you don't, even if you're going to have a primary focus on the majority, which seems to make sense, how to not otherize the minority, especially when sometimes it could be more than just one or two people or someone passing through that doesn't live in your vicinity.
Clear. I think it's like you said, being reasonable. If you have 95% of one ethnicity or one language, then obviously Islam teaches us to deal with the conventional majority, all right, without neglecting or scorning or looking down on that minority. So merging and marrying between those two principles, I think is where it gets a little sticky. Okay, this community is clearly predominantly of this race or of this background. So the first thing that the imam and the board and the teachers, they have to gear to are the cultural norms, the language of those people. So I don't necessarily feel or think that that's racism, all right? You look at the Quran, there are many rulings to this day that were based off of the culture of the Arabs. It was a cultural norm. If you ask someone today, when you get into an argument with your wife, what do you say to her? What do you do? Do you tell your wife, Anti alayka dhahri ummi, you're like my mother's back, you're like my mother's foot? Who says that? But it's in the Quran, and the reason why Allah Azza wa Jalla sent down that ruling is because that was the conventional culture of the people that were the majority, not all, but the majority of the Prophet's companions. But at the same time, the universal principles, Dr. Abu Zayd mentioned, the timeless guidance of the Quran is for everybody. So if I have two brothers in my masjid that aren't, let's say, Pakistani, or they're not black, American, whatever, I think that it's the job of the leader to go to them and to sit with them, as Abu Sumayyah mentioned. Look, this is what we do, this is what we call it. No, you eat it like that. You bring them in. And maybe next time you guys can bring a dish. Don't make them feel that they're, ostracized or unwelcome and pushed out. However, if 95% of the people in my masjid come from Palestine and they really don't speak English that well, it only makes sense to give the khutbah in Arabic. It only makes sense. But eventually you have to work on teaching the American brothers Arabic. Or you have to work on getting someone to translate for them. Okay, so I think the balance has to be there. The blending has to be there. And I humbly feel that balance doesn't always mean 50-50. Or blending doesn't always have to be equal. It could be 70-30, 60-40. But the problem is when I do have a need, you don't serve my need. The problem is when I try to come and be a part of the community, I'm pushed away and shooed away because I'm not from your country or your background. That's the problem. All right, so I think there has to be a balance. You have to be reasonable. And Allah Azza wa Jal clearly mentioned with regards to race and color and tongue, as was mentioned with regards to being color conscious, but in the Islamic sense. And Allah knows best.
I think the golden ayah regarding the subject that Shaykh al-Zayd mentioned to us, that Allah Azza made us into nations and tribes. He decreed difference, لِتَعَارَفُوا, so you may get to know one another. I think one of the most important ways to make sure you're sensitive to people's reservations or people's preferences is to actually make the extra effort, have the consideration to go find out about them. Or else you can offend someone and then be received by that someone as an arrogant person, and then the ricochet effect just goes back and forth. It just spins out of control whenever you don't stop to sit and think, or even ask, or even go the extra mile and introduce. I remember one time, it's okay if you guys don't find this funny, I was in Minneapolis, and I was invited to his brother's house, extremely generous. He just filled the sufra, like this blanket on the floor with food. And then he says, go ahead, Bismillah, eat. I was like, no, tfaddal, I'm not going to eat alone. He says, no, in our culture, the guests eat first. I was like, listen, with all due respect, I'm not eating alone while you guys stare at me. I'm not going to eat alone. So he's like, okay, I'll eat with you. So he jumps in, he says, see, I'm not difficult with people, because I know people's cultures vary, right? He says, back home in our country, he said, we had a guest from a visiting town, it's the same country, same language, from a visiting town. in our culture, you have to feed them all the food first. He said in his culture, it was disrespectful for you not to like give due regard to the poor woman cooking all day. And so his culture was that you had to finish all the food. And so we gave him all the food, and he's eating and eating and eating. And like, of course, like the kids are peeking through the curtain in the kitchen, like, oh my God, are we gonna eat tonight or not? And he's thinking like, oh my God, I can't breathe. And he's going, and then all of a sudden he stops. So they're like, are you done? He's like, no, just 1 second. And he just like unbuckles his belt to make more room. And so he says, I understand, people are different. I'm not gonna be hard-headed about this. People have their areas of comfort and areas of discomfort. And so this comes back to just being sensitive, the way our Prophet ﷺ was, to the way people are. Like when a Bedouin man came screaming out in the middle of a crowd, Ya Muhammad, Ya Muhammad. I never forget this hadith. All the Sahaba like scolded him, like that is not acceptable in like the prophetic manners or manners with the Prophet culture, the Medinan culture. And so they said, Uskut, ukhdud min sawt, like shut up, stop it, stop yelling at the Prophet. And he's like, Ya Muhammad, like he's pushing people out the way. He wants to like have first dibs and talk to the Prophet ﷺ, regardless of who's talking to him right now. And so when the Prophet ﷺ saw everyone about to like alienate this guy, the narrator said, this is just so beautiful. The narrator says, the Prophet ﷺ started mimicking him, yelling back to him in the same tone. Ha ha, like here I am, you know, just so he wouldn't feel awkward. And so it doesn't take much from us to just stop and say, how can I make sure as many people as possible are not feeling awkward? Please.
And I think that maybe one of the things that needs to be done is that if you recognize that within your community you have another population of people who are growing within that community, is that you begin to choose from among them a few of them who you're going to mentor, right? You're going to mentor them and you're going to empower them so that inshallah ta'ala, you yourself may not have to worry about how to service and cater to them, right? They may know best how to service and cater to that group of people. So you empower them, and then they come to you and tell you, we need X, Y, and Z, you know what I mean, on this particular day, for this particular event, or for this, you know what I mean, for this educational session, inshallah ta'ala. And through that empowerment, inshallah ta'ala, you're actually, you know what I mean, helping to benefit and grow another portion of this, you know, Muslim community, inshallah ta'ala.
Maybe even like a self-appointed welcome committee or something, please. Jump.
So I think what also needs to be pointed out, culture isn't something that's all good, right? There are so many elements in culture, in various cultures, that need to be changed. And Muslims at their heart are reformers. Our Prophet ﷺ, he came, he reformed so many bad customs. So all of us, I mean, I'll speak about the Desi culture. We have so many things in our culture coming from India, Pakistan, that are absolutely un-Islamic and need to be changed. So we can't use culture as an excuse, well, that's our culture. So there are so many, you know, you always have referred to the guidance of Quran and Sunnah. When things are neutral, then culture is normative. You know, it's something that, you know, adds to diversity. But when it encroaches on Islamic principles, as it often does, so we have to be honest, many cultural practices go against what's right. So it's up to us. So it's not for someone from outside my culture to carry on that banner, but it's up to us in our own cultures, our own families, to try to fix many things. So not just accepting everything that's cultural as allowed or acceptable. So that's very important to know.
So I'd like to begin with Sheikh Zayd. I'd like to just drop not a bomb, but thoughts on, I'm not going to say the cons, but the potential cons with obviously the pros and the precedent for interracial marriages in Islam. Please.
I knew that was coming. Yeah.
So
you know, the idea of an interracial marriage is actually a beautiful idea, because it's, you know, it's kind of like those different colored flowers make a more beautiful bouquet kind of concept, right? So we want to be able to embrace it and want to promote it, because it is the more Islamic spirited ideal to promote and embrace. At the same time, we have to realize and think about the general circumstances or conditions or qualities that make for compatible spouses, right? Sometimes within your own ethnic group, even if you're married within your own ethnic group, there are issues of compatibility. There are issues of different families, as you mentioned, different towns in the same country have different customs and expectations to the point that people are offended if they are not honored. Similarly, even within the same culture, between different families, you have different customs. And each custom or way of doing things can become a point of conflict if it is not dealt with in a culturally sensitive way, with an open heart and understanding. So compound that with the fact that you come from another race. This may or may not lead to more complexity into the relationship. So I think that while the idea is beautiful, we have to be very careful why we're promoting it. Yes, it should be promoted. Yes, it is possible. Yes, it can be a very successful, beautiful, long-lasting marriage. And people who may speak out against it or not be supportive of it may not necessarily be lacking in their support because of the different ethnic clashes or racial clashes that they see, but just because when there is more factors of compatibility are present, regardless of what they're related to, that just generally increases the success of the marriage. So I think it's important to not be judgmental and to really focus on the intentions of people when they give advice, when they're talking about the pros and cons of such an arrangement.
We're going to get one from each of you on this one. By the way, if anyone doesn't know, Dr. Abu Zayd is Sheikh Zayd's husband, okay? For Sharia compliance and why he's never disagreeing with her, by the way.
We're both from Pakistan.
And they're both from Pakistan.
Speak Punjabi. We're both kind of from the same, not from the same caste, right? But so on this issue of compatibility, what was I trying to say? You were saying something, and then
something about Islam.
okay. So I think the issue is not race. I don't like interracial marriages. It's more about compatibility, and that's one of the many factors. But so the example I was trying to give, even from coming from the same country, we have so many differences between my family and her family that sometimes it's night and day. And which side is right and wrong. If she answers the question, it'll be different from my side. But there are huge personality issues, cultural issues, and the way we eat dinner and things like that. Do you sit on the floor? We sit on the floor. Our family sits on tables and chairs. So things like that. So it's more about compatibility than race. So race is not the main issue here. Can interracial marriages work? It's about compatibility. And that's far greater than just race. And that's even within races, that's an issue. But if it can work, that's really beautiful. I think the Quranic directive, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا, I think it realizes that Quranic objective far greater than marrying within your own caste or your own group. So if someone can do it, mashallah, Allah bless them, and we need more examples like that. So I'm for interracial marriage.
With regards to the Prophet ﷺ marrying into different tribes or clans to build bonds, and also brief input on the topic at hand, I would say the first thing that we have to do is we have to have direction and navigation. Which way are we going? Which direction are we going in? What is our GPS? Are we going to just do Quran and Sunnah? Are we going to go with the modern wave? Where are we going? Are we doing a mixture of both, etc.? Obviously, the Quran and the Sunnah clearly teach us what's right and what's wrong, clear as day. The modern world in which we live in, you go to school, you go to work, the United States, the history of this country, what's currently going on in this country is against most of my daily practices as a Muslim. I'm not following Quran and Sunnah, nor am I following the heritage of the civil rights movement, etc., and all of the things that I benefit from on a daily basis in the United States. So I personally feel, from my experiences, is that if we don't have the proper guidance and navigation, we're going to be totally lost. We're not following the sources of the religion, nor are we following common sense of the modern world today. That's firstly. Secondly is, from my experiences, and I have many horror stories on the topic, horror stories, things that you wouldn't believe. You would call me a liar if I told you that could come out of a Muslim's mouth with regards to interracial marriage. So oftentimes it is based off of culture and fear of a clash. I wouldn't mind you marrying another race, but his family and our family and what they expect and how we live, etc. is a problem. But that does not mean that there aren't plenty of times in which the father denies for no other reason except for race. No other reason. And the compatibility is there. Unfortunately, or they may love each other before marriage, and he says, over my dead body. As long as he's from India and you're from Bangladesh, forget about it. Is that the same race? Is that culture? Black, white, Arab, black, Yemeni, the list goes on. Plenty of examples inside of New York City and outside of New York City. And oftentimes, the brother may be totally compatible with the sister, financially, age, religion, and the list goes on. And the father or the mother or the families may say no for no other reason except for color of skin. So I don't think, I don't think that can be denied and rejected. Last but not least is all of the ulama of Islam, as we all know, they unanimously agree that in al-kafata mu'tabara, that it has to be compatibility. It has to be compatibility. But they differ on what is and what isn't compatibility. So many people say that compatibility is general and it's broad. Profession. Some people say that a rich woman cannot marry a poor husband. It could be age. It could be tribe and background and cultural orientation. And some people say that race is considered incompatibility. And others, they say that there are only two conditions for compatibility in Islam, and that is ad-din wal khuluq. It's religious practice and good character. Religious practice and good character. So, if I have a daughter, and I'm black, my daughter's black, and she wants to marry a brother who's from Puerto Rico, or from Palestine, or from Egypt, and she says, Abby, he's a good brother and I love him. And I look at his characteristics. Can he take care of my daughter? Is he of the good age for my daughter? Is he a good Muslim? Is he? And he feels all of those characteristics, and I say no, that I feel that I'm going to fall into racism. But I have two brothers that come to marry my daughter. One's black and one's Egyptian. They both have similar qualities, very similar. And I say, I'm not saying that I would say this, because I believe in interracial marriages myself. I believe in them. But let's just say if I said, maybe it's best to marry someone from your own culture and race, in which we can minimize the problems that all marriages have and suffer. Perhaps we don't have no customs over food, over address, over visiting family members. Can my family members come into my house and walk into my house? That's not from my culture. No one can just come over and say, hey, where you guys at? Other cultures that may be normal, in which the mother and the father just bust in and, yeah. You see what I'm saying to you? So, okay, and I'll give
By the way, the Prophet ﷺ did that with Ali and Fatima. Radiallahu anhum.
So
just,
with that being said,
it's awkward, so it's funny, but just not condescending.
With that being said, I had a friend once. He was originally from Somalia, and he was from Fairfax, Virginia. We were in Medina living together, and one day he came to me and he was complaining about when he got married, and he says, where I'm from in my culture, if you're married to your wife for 2 or 3 years and you don't have kids yet, the family summons you. The mother, the father, the aunts, they sit you down on the sofa and they grill you and they say, what's going on? What are you guys not doing right? And he's Somalian, but he has the American mindset that I don't want that in my marriage. So discrimination is one thing. Trying to minimize differences and go with the already existing supposed compatibility, it's a different story. So if they have equal qualifications and you deny him because of his race, that's wrong. But if he's better or they're equal, why not marry from your own race? Perhaps. However, the last thing that I'll say is success is from Allah and only Allah. You may try to make a checklist of compatibility and your daughter gets divorced in a month or a year. And it may be someone that you don't think is compatible because of race, because of age, and they may have a happy, fruitful marriage. So I think it's all about character and personality. That's the most important thing. Allah knows best.
Jazakallah khairan. Abu Sumayyah, if you could share, if you would like. Barakallahu lakum. A few thoughts on this, and then we'll take just final words very quickly from each of you. Final nasiha before we open the floor for questions, for about 7-8 minutes to questions. If any of you have any particular questions, please contribute to the conversation. Jazakallah khair.
Mashallah. I don't think that I can put it any more beautiful than what Mufti, mashallah, put it. Mashallah, tabarakallah. I do want to highlight with a story to kind of bring home what he's talking about. And this is just to caution our fathers. We had a case when I lived in Illinois. It was a Palestinian family and an African American family. The boy was African American, the girl was Palestinian. The father, he didn't want her to marry this boy because he was African American. The imam was intervening, and he was trying to discuss and talk to them. The father was like, no, I don't care, no. If she does it, I'm cutting her off, she's gone. The imam saw that these two were going to run away, elope, they were going to do whatever they wanted to do at the end of the day. So the imam kind of told the family, look, we need to make this happen so that it can be done correctly. He intervened, he allowed them to get married. They actually moved to another state. Months later, the father, he found out that he was like in stage 4 cancer, if I believe. He came to the imam and he said, yeah, imam, I haven't spoken to my daughter in 4 months and I want to see her. The imam, he immediately calls the daughter and says, listen, your father is in the hospital on his deathbed. We don't know how much longer he has. Jump on the next plane. The husband, because he was a good guy, he put the wife on the next plane. The daughter, when she lands, she goes to the hospital immediately, straight to the hospital. She does not make it to speak with her father. She doesn't make it to speak with her father. Can you imagine? The father dying, hoping to try to resolve this issue between him and his daughter that was based on something that shouldn't be present anyway. And then the daughter as well, there has to be some resentment there as well as for her as well. You know, we don't want to be in that situation that we're the one on the deathbed, or that, you know, it's our daughter or our sisters that are going through this particular situation, right? So without a doubt, I think that, you know, it's very important that we, you know, look at compatibility. My wife is Puerto Rican. I think that, you know, again, I agree. It's easier to stay within your own culture to kind of bring down the issues. And I'm not against, you know, marrying with other cultures as well. But there are issues, right? I remember also there was an African-American brother who married a Bengali sister. And they called me to the house so that I can deal with some issues. And the first the brother starts talking about, he's like, she put pepper in the fruit. He's like, who puts pepper in fruit? Right? So you have to do your investigation ahead of time, right? Do your investigation ahead of time, inshallah ta'ala. And if, for my brothers, because oftentimes this is it, the racism or whatever it is, the discrimination. Well, let's take racism off the panel, right? The discrimination that takes place is often when it comes time to marrying the daughters, right? For the brothers, if you're going to approach, I'll use myself for an example. I get approached for Latinas all the time by people of different races. Yeah, Imam, yeah, Akhi, do you know a Latina sister? But if I was in turn to say, mashallah, I have a brother actually for your daughter. La, 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 la. You can't have my daughter. But I'll give my son to your people, right? What kind of exchange is this, right? You marry your son to my people, but you won't marry my daughter to my people, right? So I think we need to kind of be aware and conscious of that as well, inshallah ta'ala. And maybe, I don't know, if Sheikh Hatem or Sheikh Waleed is in here, maybe I can get a fatwa on maybe creating an app where I can maybe charge for everybody that asks me for a Latina. And maybe I can help sponsor NJ Dawah next year, inshallah ta'ala.
MashaAllah. That's a great intention, MashaAllah. Some final nasiha from each of you, please, before we open the floor to questions, inshallah, if you would like to. Either of you, please. We're going to go all around, inshallah. We can start with you if you'd like.
I think the brother put it very well. It's just about, you know, trying to create as much harmony as possible between the two. Couple marriages hard enough, you know, as it is. So at the same time, what Brother Mufti mentioned is very true. If you have two people that are equally compatible, no doubt people will just say no because of the race. I know this is something that we can't deny. And it's something that you have to fight against in yourself, just like you have to fight any tendency that is not pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's just that type of an inner struggle of the nafs. And to do that successfully, you have to first recognize it. And I think this panel is part of doing that.
I'll leave you with Some beautiful words from our Prophet ﷺ. Really, when you look at his wisdom and the way he interpreted verses, sometimes the answers are right there. And they're so far more eloquent and beautiful than we can put them in our words. So he recited the verse that we all quoted multiple times tonight. Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha wa ja'alnakum shu'uban wa qaba'ila lita'arafu inna akramakum 'inda Allahi atqakum. So he recited that on the day of Fath Makkah. And this narration is in the tafsir of Qurtubi. He gave a khutbah, it's just one line. It's 3 lines, but I'll share with you what he said. So beautiful. He said, after he recited that verse to everyone. And then he said, Ayyuhan nas, innaman nasu rajulan. He said, oh human beings, there are only 2 types of people. Let that settle in your hearts. At the end of the day, all the discussion, there are only 2 types of people. Innaman nasu rajulan, barrun, taqiyun, karimun ala rabbihi, wa fajirun, shaqiyun, hayyinun ala rabbihi. He said, the one who is righteous, who's pious, and he's noble in the sight of Allah. And the second man or the second woman is one who's wicked or disobedient, and he's low in the sight of Allah. So at the end of the day, let that be in your mind. There's only 2 types of people in the world. The one that has taqwa and the one that doesn't. And then there are different levels of taqwa. And that's the only thing that should matter in the end of the day.
Mufti, please, in a minute.
In a minute, I would just say be real and do unto others like you like for them to do unto you. How does it feel when you're discriminated against? How does it feel when you're rejected for no tangible reason? Very brief story. Once when I was in Medina, there was a debate between people who call themselves Ashraf. People who say they're related to the Prophet ﷺ and his family, Sharif. It was the debate between these individuals and people that aren't related to the Prophet ﷺ with regards to marrying outside of their tribe or their clan. So some of the sheikhs and researchers and the professors, they said to the people who call themselves Ashraf, they said, you guys are fanatics. No one can marry one of your women unless he's Sharif. That's not right. That's not Islam. That's Jahiliyyah, etc., etc., etc. So the Ashraf, the Sharifs, they said, Bal antumul muta'assibun. They said, no, you guys are racists and bigots. You guys are prejudiced. And I'm going to prove it. He says, right now in the Islamic University of Medina, we have over 150 nationalities, if not 200. He says, and I have students come from all different countries of Africa. Which one of you right now would marry your daughter to this one right here? And that one right there. And this one. Look at his skin. Look how dark his skin is. He's from Nigeria. He's from Niger. He's from Mali. He's from. Obviously, they didn't say anything because they weren't expecting that. He says, so don't accuse us of something you're guilty yourself. So be real, be honest. Treat people how you like them to treat you, and don't lie to yourself. And Allah knows best.
Don't let people push you away. Whatever the situation may be, whatever is going on in your community, wherever you are at, whatever you are facing, inshallah ta'ala, like I said, I think this morning I was telling ElShinawy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He allowed me to go through a process of things and be with the process of people today until I got to this point, I think to kind of help soften me before I came onto the panel. But Sheikh Hatem this morning, he was mentioning that sometimes we have to kind of yield our positions a little bit, inshallah ta'ala, for a greater good. And if we kind of just get up and run and leave, or say I'm going to build something else and construct something else and the heck with you and I don't want any part of you, then we lose sight of the greater cause, which is إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً. That verily the believers are brothers and sisters of each other, right? So sometimes we may have to yield our position a little bit, inshallah ta'ala, and maneuver in some ways, inshallah ta'ala, within our communities and within our Islamic institutions until we can find an opening, a gap, inshallah ta'ala, to help bring about change or to bring about the change that we want to see in our communities. But let's be those people who bring about that change, still trying to stick to having wisdom and hikmah and doing it in the best of manners, inshallah ta'ala.
Jazakallahu khairan. Barakallahu laka khair. I think, just like telling yourself it'll take time, it's a work in progress, under construction, it's getting better, it's far better than other communities, is the way the Prophet ﷺ actually did it, right? I just remember this one hadith concerning interracial marriages when some of the co-wives of Safiyyah, all the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, they kind of wanted to like get at her a little bit. They said to her, "You're a Jew, the son of a Jew, a daughter of a Jew." And so she came to the Prophet ﷺ crying, right? And how the Prophet ﷺ handled this, I think, maybe summarize one more time just what we're saying. Like, it's a work in progress. The Prophet ﷺ didn't make it an apocalyptic thing, right? He said, "Why didn't you tell them that my father is a prophet?" Right? Musa alayhi salam. "And my brother is a prophet, Harun, or my uncle is a prophet, and Harun alayhi salam, and I am the wife of a prophet." And then he turned to Hafsa and said, "Ittaqillaha ya Hafsa." And life went on. I think we need to lift ourselves above that and not get stuck in the pendulum effect and feel like there is no khair in this ummah. The khair will remain in this ummah, even if we're going to recognize at the same time that it's a work in progress. Are there time for questions, or should we just end it here? Huh? Oh, okay. So Ammar is going to relieve me of my post, inshallah, with some spoken word about the unity of this ummah and its diversity. Barakallahu lakum wa jama'a. Jazakallahu khairan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم